Yeah, I'll stop my video.
ઓકે જીતેશભાઈ આપણે નવકાર મંત્રથી ચાલુ કરીએ. તમે બોલો.
Sure.
ગો હેડ જીતેશ.
કરું?
Yeah.
Okay. નમો અરહંતાણ નમો સિદ્ધાણમ નમો આઈવિયાણમ નમો વજ્જાયાણમ નમો લુવે સંવસાહમ.
જય જીતેન્દ્ર.
જય
ઓકે સો શ્વેતાબેન આપણે કેવી રીતે કરવું છે પહેલા એક ઓવરવ્યુ લઈ લઈએ તમારાથી જૈનેશભાઈ, પછી
Yes, that would be
we'll
good.
go with Q&A, right? તો યા તમારું મેન્યુઅલ યા ગો હેડ સોરી.
હા તો ગુજરાતીમાં જ અત્યારે વાત કરું, like how do you want me to go with it?
યા કઈ પણ ચાલશે. આઈ થિંક ગુજરાતી, ઇંગ્લિશ, એનીથિંગ ઇઝ ફાઇન.
Okay. So I have gone through this, much of it, except the chapter on Karana Karya, like the
તમારે
five
ત્યાંથી
Actually,
હા થોડુંક ડિસ્ટર્બન્સ આવે છે, કંઈક હલાવો છો તમે અહીંયા?
pages હશે. Okay, just
actually, I think English would be better because Siddharth is also going to view the recording and kids are
Ah,
going to view it,
okay.
right?
ઓકે.
Yeah. So I'll continue in English. No problem.
Yeah, thank you.
Aji pan kai, if you hear some more disturbances, please let me know.
ઓકે.
So I have gone through this at least till the 7 nayas, and then I browsed through the remaining part. I am currently doing my PhD on this topic, so I don't want to confuse a few things over here, but at the same time I need to be loyal to the text which talk about Anekantavada, because the problem that we are facing today is everyone knows Anekantavada, or everyone thinks that he or she knows what it is, but we somehow have not been reading the text, the primary sources which speak about these doctrines, but it's most of the times we rely upon some secondary sources, some commentary, not even a commentary, but maybe some modern literature which is written by some of the scholars amongst us. Maybe they are academicians, or even if they are not academicians, but they have some scholarship with respect to these doctrines and they write about it. But at the same time, what happens is when these doctrines, there is always a problem of making it relevant, and in the process of somehow trying to make it relevant, this entire discourse on Anekantavada has shaped into a different direction, wherein the popular account of this goes like everyone is right from their own perspective. Now, this statement does not represent what is Anekantavada, and which is why, I said this in the beginning, I don't want to confuse you, because you might be referring to many sources where things will be mentioned in these ways. But in order to arrive at a consistent interpretation of Anekantavada, or let's say logical consistency, where the doctrine does not refute its own position, or the doctrine does not be a case of contradiction, where in some cases you apply it, in some cases you just say, no, it doesn't work here. This is where it leads to inconsistency. And why does it happen? Because there have been such attempts to make it relevant to things for which it was not actually meant to be. So what is Anekantavada? It's about reality. It's about the thing which has multiple characteristics. Now, the famous story of the blind man and the elephant, where 6 blind people are approaching the elephant, and each of them has their own view about what is an elephant. Now, even though they are touching parts of the elephant, they end up making statements about the elephant as a whole, and which is why they are said to be quarreling with one another, because one of them says something else, some other one person says something else, and therefore they end up quarreling. Eventually, someone who is able to see why they are quarreling and is also able to see what exactly is an elephant like, resolves the disputes among them. Now, I have a question over here, and that is, most of the accounts that you may have come across might say that each of the blind person was correct from their own point of view, and they couldn't see the other point of view, and therefore they were quarreling. But this point, each of them is right from their own point of view, in my opinion, is misplaced, because if each of them is right from their own point of view, and if we combine all 6 of them, we should get one elephant with all those respective parts in harmony with one another. But in this situation, since they saying that the elephant is like a wall, or the elephant is like a rope, or the elephant is like a pillar, or something else and something else, if we combine them, we will get 6 elephants and not one elephant. I don't know if you're able to see the difference which I'm trying to emphasize over here, but the point is, they were not right from any point of view, or they never had a point of view, which is why the example is of a blind person. And you know, the implication of this parable has been literally taken to apply as if, in our case, as if we all are blind, and as if the wise person is equal to the omniscient, and it is the omniscient alone who can see the entire reality, and we all have our limited perspectives and we cannot see it. But that is not what the parable was trying to convey. That story was trying to convey that if you have if you want to make a description about a thing, you need to be careful whether it's about the part of a thing itself or the entire thing. That is where the whole problem is. If those 6 people would have said that this part of an elephant is like a rope, there won't be any problem, and therefore they are right from their own point of view. But when they say elephant is like a rope, that is where the problem starts, because the other person says, no, the elephant is like a wall. So one who is touching the stomach or the central part of that elephant says it's like a wall. Someone who is holding the leg says it's like a pillar. Someone who is touching the tail might say it's like a rope, and so on. Now, I don't know if you're able to see this problem. The problem is, if you combine all 6, you should get 6 elephants. Now, people go on and on extending this parable to our daily life, and start saying that, you know, they have their own point of view, we can have our own point of view, and both can coexist, and this is Anekantavad. I don't have a problem with people having a point of view. That's absolutely correct. There's no problem that different points of view can coexist. But the problem is, this is not Anekantavad. Anekantavad is grounded in reality. It's about things. It's about what exists and what is the nature of that existence. So when we say that a thing is permanent as well as it is changing, and we say that it is having the properties of existence as well as non-existence, or when we say that it is identical and different, there are different perspectives that are playing over there. So the same jiva was earlier in a different phase of life, maybe Swarga, Naraka, or some other form of life. Right now, that jiva is in this human form of existence. After this, might be in some other form of existence. So if you look at that substance, it is permanent, because Jiva doesn't become a Jiva. The Jiva stays Jiva irrespective of wherever its mode of existence takes it. But at the same time, it's also not the case that the changes are unreal. There are different modes that keep on changing time to time. So earlier it was something else, right now it is something else, and in the future also it will be something else. So this ascription of or predication of two contradictory properties that appear contradictory in one and the same thing is what Anekantavad was all about. I'm not saying that all of this discussion on, everyone is right from their own point of view and so on and so forth is completely misplaced, but we need to rethink where is it coming from and what are its sources and how do you make it consistent with the other positions within Jainism. One of the standard argument that is put forth is how do you bring Anekantavad with, let's say, vegetarianism or veganism or and it's very safe to just walk out by saying that I have my own point of view. If I want to continue with this, I can. You have your own point of view and I respect you. But that is not how Anekantavada works. Anekantavada is about things out there. It's not about what I believe or what you believe or what person X says or what person Y says. It starts with a thing outside in the reality, and it's about making sense of the different phenomena that we encounter when we try to cognize it, when we try to interpret that reality. And that is where Syadvad, Nayavad, and everything goes along with it. It's not about me as a subject having a point of view, because it doesn't matter what point of view I have, until and unless it conforms or it corresponds with the reality which is perceived by the Jinnah. Now, I'll just make one more comment and I'll stop to take your questions first, so that after this brief introduction, I would know where to move ahead. This elephant and the blind man story, which also many a times is said to imply that that wise person who comes and shows that no, you are quarreling because you couldn't see the other point of view, and so on and so forth, and ultimately resolves it. That wise person is usually considered as an omniscient being. That the omniscient being is the one who is able to see things clearly, and we all can never see that. We all can at most have a limited view of reality. This idea again is completely misplaced, because none of the texts speak like that, and there are many textual proofs that go on the other extreme. And I'm not talking about any one particular text belonging to one tradition, but I'm talking about Samantabhadra, Akalanka, Vidyananda, and Yashovijay. All of them, they all agree with this idea that there is no difference between Syadvad and Kevala insofar as they are able to cognize the entire reality. The difference between the two, omniscience and Syadvad, is that this omniscience has the ability to cognize everything simultaneously at one and the same time. And it is direct. It's not via any medium of scriptures or something else. It's direct. It's simultaneous. On the other hand, Syadvada can at most cognize things successively, one by one. You can talk about one characteristic at a time and then move on to the next one. If you go on asserting both of them together simultaneously, you cannot express it. And that is why you have that bhanga, avaktavya. It's not that it is something that I cannot describe or I cannot put it into words. It's about simultaneous predication, which is not possible for us. So the difference between the two, omniscience and our way of knowing reality, is not that the omniscient one has a full access and we have a very limited access. It's more about being simultaneously able to see all the aspects and being able to see those aspects one by one, and that the omniscient being has a direct access to that reality because the soul has developed that full potential, that potential has been actualized, whereas we have a very limited potential. So we rely upon some other sources. It can be a scripture, it can be senses, it can be mind, it can be all of them. So that is why our access to reality is mediated via these, whereas the omniscient person can access them directly. So this was a brief before starting any discussion on Anekantavad, because the 2-3 fundamental assumptions that I'm trying to question over here are Anekantavada is not about everyone is right from their own point of view. Anekantavada is not about the thing that omniscient one is the one who is alone the person who knows everything. And Anekantavada has a very different relation with ahimsa. I know I have raised a lot of questions. Feel free to ask them now, or else you may let me know which particular sections we need to talk about. And I also would like to submit that it's okay if you may not change all of this right now. There is nothing wrong over here as such, except that view that Anekantavada is about promoting tolerance and everything. But all my humble suggestion is, to look for the primary sources where these ideas are coming from. And I can share some more academic literature on this, because in academia, scholars have called this many things. I don't know why Jain scholars haven't paid attention to this, but uh, uh, I can send n number of research papers that have debated this idea of Anekantavada as intellectual tolerance, and even went on to one of them even went on to call it as a tolerance myth, and so on and so forth. So it's not that easy if you read Anekantavada via the contemporary accounts of it. One can make much more sense, make it much more consistent if one goes back to the text, which of course are not accessible to all, which are translations are not easily accessible. Even if translations are there, they might not be that accurate. So it requires a lot of work in this direction, where you need to rebuild the entire thing. So feel free to ask your questions or anything.
So Jinesh, yeah, thanks for the introduction. Really, really,
Yeah.
it's definitely very complex as such to discuss and understand this topic. And that I understand just from your introduction, there is a lot of controversies there from what's out here and what we need to. As far as what we are facing currently, as you saw in the manual also, we want to, as difficult as it is to understand, I think we want to make it as simplified and correct for the kids to understand. And that starts with the coaches. We have a couple of coaches here also, and if they can also understand well to be able to explain to their students, then that would be good. So from what we have, and you have read that also in the manual, we want to make sure if there is definitely anything that's incorrect, then we need to have that out. I know you said, promoting tolerance is not one of the things, and that should not be there. But if we can simplify something in a better way for them to understand, and then you saw the rest of the topics about going further into details about Anekantvad as we go. If you can talk about those two, then that would be good.
Yeah, I know I have created some issues right now, but I'm sorry, I can't help, because if we want to understand this, we need to set aside those I would call them assumptions, unless they are proved from textual validity, because right now it might be really I know how this would be received right now by you, and I can say this only because we are just few of us. I haven't talked about this with people in general in the public. That I would do maybe after I have my thesis published or something, or some other day, because we need to really progress in a very simple way, in a very progressive way. I don't want to say that everyone has got it wrong and I'm the one trying to show that no, this is the way to look at it. No, it's not that. But the point is, once we begin with those criteria, like, Anekantavada means we need to tolerate each and every view, we need to respect each and every view, which has become a much more popular account of it. It becomes really difficult to then talk about Anekantavada in these setting of, let's say, Dravya Guna Paryaya, or all of these doctrines, even Ahimsa for that matter. So it's one thing to think of Anekantavada as promoting tolerance, but someone would say, no, from my point of view, or a terrorist would say, from my point of view, taking lives of people is good. I find joy in this. How do you deal with such a position? So my whole uh, purpose in raising these questions and all of this discussion was to just see that this entire theory of Anekantavada as showing that everyone is right from their own point of view, let's keep it at one place aside and then look at Anekantavada afresh. Only then I think we will be really able to make full sense of it and understand it better. So in terms of explaining this to the kids, let's say for instance, any topic within Anekantavada. So let's talk about Jiva, for instance, or Dravya. Dravya is a substance. It is having qualities. It has modes, that is Guna and Paryaya. And then there is this discussion on Utpada, Vyaya, Dravya, where Utpada means origination, Vyaya means cessation, Dravya means permanent. Each and every substance is characterized by these phenomena, where Utpad and Vyay represent the change that is happening within it, and Dravya represents that which is underlying those changes, that which stays what it is. How do we make this relevant to our practical discussions, or how do we make the most of it? Well, one needs to employ the correct perspective at the correct time. So you have two Nayas, Dravyartika and the Paryayartika. The whole problem is when we apply Paryayartika, Paryayastika, whichever name we prefer, uh, at, at a place where it was not expected. Or we use Dravyartika where it was not expected. That is where, the problem comes. How we can make this relevant to our life is to cognize, is to see things from the right perspectives at the right time, or at the proper, in a proper context. So for instance, let's say if we all find those issues of misinterpretation, and how, so if I say something and if a child is misinterpreting it, we always counter by saying that no, this is not what I meant this. What is going over there? What is actually going over there is the perspective from which the child is trying to understand is not what we meant to convey. And that is how, the solution is reached. Now, with respect to knowledge of reality, we have 7 tattvas. What we need to understand is each of them, uh, uh, or in order to classify them into 2 categories, you have Dravya, like Jivaji, these are kind of substances. The remaining 5, Asrava, Bandha, Samvarna, Moksha, and even Punya and Papa, so 9. So the remaining 7, if we look at 9 tattvas, are Paryaya tattvas. Jiva is never without a Paryaya, and a Paryaya is never without a substance. So Jiva. if I am angry, and then in the next moment I say that I was not angry, or if I say that I never meant to say so, or if I just deny the reality of that anger, which was very much real in a very vivid manner. It was quite vivid to everyone. I was angry. But then in the next moment, I say, nahi, I am pure. Atma to Shuddha hai. Atma doesn't get involved into all of this. The soul is absolutely pure. This is where Anekantavada would say, no, if you are talking about Pariyaya, you need to treat them as very much real, as part of reality, and do not contradict it with the other aspect where you would just deny its reality altogether. And you would say, no, I am pure and I never get uh, involved into all of these uh, emotions like krodha, man, maya, lobh, etc. All of these are merely happening in the pariyaya and it doesn't affect me. That is not how it works. Anekantavada would say that pariyaya is also part of your existence as much as dravya is. So when the lotus, which is situated in that mud and all of those dirt and etc., the panka, that is how they say in Sanskrit, pankaja. The word pankaja is actually panka represents feature, dirt. So if you say that it's the lotus is impure or the lotus is not pure, again it needs to be qualified with the perspective by saying this is from the perspective of its let's say pariyaya or its sanyoga or the surroundings with which it is. But if one goes to its real nature, if one tries to observe its real nature, it is unaffected, it is not mixed with all those dirt particles that are around it, and it's still pure. Even gold, which is present in mines, there are many impurities present in those uh, gold, which are just extracted from the mines. But at the same time, the gold is pure as well. So you constantly have this dialectic of dravya pariyay, dravya pariyay, that eventually makes you arrive at a correct vision of reality, of the self, of the non-self. And the problem that arises is when we cling on to one of these aspects, either pariyay or dravya, either change or permanence, either difference or identity, either non-existence or existence. So we need to then see how to apply these properties to one and the same thing. And if we do not apply them in that manner, then what are the problems that arise? And if we apply them, then how does it solve those problems? So Dravya Parya is just one instance of it. Suppose if I say that the jiva must strive for moksha, the jiva must put efforts in order to attain moksha. And that person responds, but I am already pure. I don't have any impurity within me. I am absolutely pure. So then you will have to say that no, this present state of existence, if it is not yours, then who is responsible for it? And is this the position that you are ready to say for each and every situation? Suppose you are hungry and if you say, I need food, and someone else comes and says, but you are not the body, will that be making sense to us? No. We would say, still, I am hungry, I need food, irrespective of whether the body is mine or not, I am hungry. So there is that inconsistency in that position where someone just clings on, ekanta kareche, dravyano. And that is where, you would say, no, look at the pariya, which is something that cannot be neglected. And if someone clings on to the pariyaya, you would say, look at the dravya as well. Why are you just looking at one aspect of that reality? Just look at the dravya as well. See that it is immutable. It doesn't change. It is as it is, as it was earlier, and it continues to be what it is. So suppose I committed a crime a few hours ago, and I end up into so much depression that I feel like it's the end of thing for me, and I have no more reason to live, and the identity of my existence with those particular moments in which I committed a crime, which were kshanika, which were momental, which were paryayas. If I identify myself with them to such an extent that I cannot think of anything else, the response from a Syadvadi would be that no, look at the Dravya. Those paryayas are not permanent. They came and they went, but Dravya remains what it is. So this is one example.
No, that is very, very nicely explained. It was very nice to understand from the different perspectives you explained about Dravya Paryay. That's good. Can you talk a little bit more, like our chapter goes into Praman? So we have classification. That's where we are confused a little bit more. So if you can talk more into that, where we have it, like you might see the classifications and how it is, and those get very confusing because it overlaps. So if you can discuss more, a little outlining
over
it.
here. Yeah, I understand. Even I had a lot of confusion with respect to this topic, and it was resolved maybe just a couple of years ago, maybe, because it's really confusing. Because on one hand, you have those five knowledge, Mati, Shruta, Avadi, Mana, Parya, Kevala. On the other hand, you have Pratyaksha, Paroksha, and then Paroksha has further subdivisions. All of that is quite interesting topic. And it's really interesting. You can really make it alive in a classroom, and students can really learn a lot from this entire discussion. I'll just give you some instances when I come over there, but these are two different schemes or two different paradigms. Let us not confuse them. Mati, Shruta, Avadi, Mana, Parya, Kevala is one way of classifying Jnana. Pratyaksha, Paroksha is another way. Why this confusion happens is because in Tattvartha Sutra 1.9, where you have this sutra which talks about five jnans, immediately in the next sutra it says that all of these are praman, and that praman is of two types, pratyaksha and paroksha. But that was in Tattvartha Sutra. By the time Siddha Sen Divakara and Akalanka, all of these acharyas, they were in a different context. They were debating with other Indian philosophies. They were debating with the atmosphere of Indian philosophy was very much different as compared to what was in Tattvartha. The purpose of Tattvartha was not to address a non-Jain. The purpose of Tattvartha was to summarize the Jaina teaching in an aphoristic style. It's not for, I mean, one can derive that, that's not a problem, but its primary intention is to address the Jaina doctrine to a Jain reader. By the time Siddha Sen Divakara, Samantabhadra, Akalanka, all of these acharyas were writing on Jain philosophy, logic, this entire discussion comes under epistemology. When they were writing on this, they also had to respond to the criticisms of other schools. They also were having this responsibility of developing a Jain view of Pramana in terms or in a context that can engage into a debate with other systems of Praman. So that is where, you know, you will find this contradictory, where on one hand you are calling it as Paroksha, like for instance Mati and Shruta, they are called as Paroksha. But you have then Samvyavaharika Pratyaksha, which is nothing but same thing. It's about mind and senses, and it's still called Pratyaksha, even though Samvyavaharika, but it's classified under Pratyaksha. And then you have Paroksha, which gives an altogether different list. But I hope you are able to see why this problem is coming. So in my opinion, it's okay to talk about both of these paradigms together, just that we need to see these are two different ways of looking at Jaina concept of knowledge, Jain concept of cognition. because it can be false as well. Knowledge by definition is true. Cognition can be true and false. So you do not have something like false knowledge, and it's contradiction in terms. Even to say true knowledge or right knowledge is tautology. So the right way of looking at it would be right cognition, wrong cognition, true cognition, false cognition, and so on. Pramana are those cognitions which are true, which lead to the knowledge of reality, which, as it is also mentioned over here, that pramana leads to, maybe I was reading somewhere else. Then.
Page
Does this ever mention about pramana phala anywhere?
There's no pramana phal, I believe.
Okay,
No.
okay, then it's okay. It's okay. Maybe I was reading somewhere else, but you're saying something. Sorry.
No, I mean, I think you were looking at the page, and I think Rajbhai was trying
Yeah,
to get
yeah.
you the page number. Okay. So go ahead.
Yeah. So now then we can easily go ahead with these classifications. Now it would be very much easy for you because pratyaksha means direct, paroksha means indirect. But if you look at it from the Nyaya Shastra point of view, like the Shastras which were engaging in debates and, engaging with other Indian philosophical systems. From that perspective, you have this pratyaksha, paroksha, pratyaksha into paramarthika and samvyavaharika, and paroksha further having smriti, pratyabhigyan, tark, anuman. And then you have agam, which is altogether a separate category. On the other hand, if you look at 5 types of knowledge, you have mati and shrut under paroksha, avadhi manapalya under vikala pratyaksha, like they are pratyaksh, but still they are incomplete. And then you have kevala jnana, which is complete as well as direct. Now, why is this category samvyavaharika coming under pratyaksha? Because a general view of pratyaksha is that it is pratyaksha is translated as perception, sense perception to be precise. Now, when Jaina theory of all of this was being developed, there were already many debates going around with respect to what is the nature of perception and what is the nature of the thing which perception is able to see, and so on and so forth. So you have Gyan and you have Geya, that is the object of knowledge, and knowledge on one hand, and the object of knowledge. So perception for most of the other Indian philosophical systems was specifically sense perception. As had most of them, because there are further, qualifications over there. But yeah, in general, perception means sense perception. It's very odd to call what I see from my eyes as something that is indirect. No. And for that reason, when I say मैं मारा आंखें थी जो मैं मारा कान थी सांभळू, just for the sake of calling it pratyaksha, this category of samvyavaharika, that it's pratyaksha, but from a very conventional perspective. It's not. Technically, it is not. But we call it pratyaksha because generally, lokma એને ઈ રીતે કહેવામાં આવે છે. Not just the other, but generally, perception matlab, it's like I have seen it through my eyes. I am the one who is perceiving it directly, and I am the first one to, so first person account and second person and third person accounts. So we never rely on third person accounts. We always look for first person evidence, first person accounts. So that thing, in order to incorporate as a pramana, and under pratyaksha, you have this separate category called as samvyavaharika. If you go by tattvartha, there is only one pratyaksha, that is paramarthika. And in it you can have sakal, vikal and all, but it's pratyaksha, paramarthika. But the samvyavaharika is specifically related to the senses and the mind, which in tattvartha was mati shruta, but over here it's, or to be precise, just mati. But over here, that Samvyavarika was devised as another category. And then you have those other categories of, let's say, Smriti, Pratyabhigyan, Tarka, and Anuman. There's just a short mention of them over here, I think. Yeah. But these are also very nice topics. Smriti is memory. Pratyabhigyan is recognition of something which we had known in the past, but that thing is again in front of us. So maybe we are identifying the past with the present on the basis of our memory as well as the object which is in front of us. Then you, over a period of time, one forms a rule kind of that wherever you have parigraha, it will lead to dukkha. This is called as vyapti. Wherever there is kashaya, it leads to dukkha. Wherever there is vitaragata, passionless state or a state of being devoid of raga dvesha, it leads to sukha, happiness. These are universal ultimate truths which Jain philosophy would keep on talking about time and again. These come under vyapti, universal pervasion. There's nothing that is beyond that. It covers each and every phenomena, each and everything that is possible. So none of the kashaya would ever be such that they may lead to happiness. Kashaya, by definition, is the one which gives pain to the soul. So you have vyapti that is covered under tarka. Tarka is, literally it may mean argument or something like that, but otherwise it's this thing. And then lastly, you have anumana, which is the culmination point in this, or you can say all of these three, 1, 2, 3, Smriti, Pratyabhigyan, Tarka, were meant for Anumana in some sense, not altogether. They have their own independence, but at the same time, in order to explain Anumana, you need all three of these. Anumana is not guesswork, you might be knowing this. Anumana over here is kind of an inference, but that inference is very much a valid source of knowledge and it's very much reliable because not all things are available to perception. So we infer. To what extent that inference is true or not depends on the vyapti, that was the step prior to it. So for instance, if I say I need to excel in my studies, and the next question is, or the next topic is, okay, so you can take admission in this college or university. But is there a necessary relation between getting admission into a particular institute and excelling in studies? No, there is not. But at the same time, they do help. So one has to be then careful what inferences are made out on the basis of which assumptions. And Tarka actually allows us to question our assumptions, whether these rules apply universally or not. And the scriptures would be the ultimate source over there in order to at least get started with these universal propositions. And then maybe one may start experiencing them that, oh yeah, this is how it is. The soul is not without consciousness in any state of its existence. So wherever there is consciousness, there is soul. Wherever there is smoke, there is fire. So these kinds of rules, once established, then on the basis of the one, you infer the other. So that is Anuman.
Good. So that was very nicely simplified and explained. But I think before we jump off of Praman and go to Nayavad, I would want to see if the coaches have any questions on this Praman, because I want to make sure, they probably had Rekha-ben, Bhavisha-ben. If you have any questions on this, please go ahead.
Sorry, still trying to digest what Jignesh Bhai said. Just going back to the definition of Anekantvad itself, like in our manual, we start off with a story. How would you recommend we replace that, or how would we introduce students to the concept of Anekantvad? I think that is where
Story.
Yeah, page 124. It starts with introduction and elephant and blind man.
Oh,
And then,
yes, yes.
Jignesh, the other thing that you said is Anekantwad is not, it's not to be equated with tolerance. But then on the same hand, we also have this notion of Madhyastha Bhavana. So how do we bring all of that together?
Yeah, I mean, one can be tolerant. That's not the problem. The problem is to link it with Anekantavad, because Anekantavad doesn't say so. So one can be extremely tolerant. I don't have a problem with tolerating each and every view that you come across. Respect would be too much, because if you don't have a commitment to your own beliefs, and if you have some doubts with your own beliefs, and then you end up respecting each and every view, so that would be much more disastrous. But yeah, one can tolerate every view. That's not a problem. But to call it Anekantavada is where things go wrong. So you have Maitri Bhavana, Pramoda Bhavana, Karuna, Madhyastha in Tattvartha itself. So it's chapter 7, somewhere in 10 or 11 sutra, somewhere near to that. So it talks about having Madhyastha Bhavana, that's fine. But my question is whether Anekantavada actually needs to address that issue of, encountering different intolerant people, or someone who is making some claims which are not in sync with what I believe or what the Jaina teaching says. What do I do over there? I think the answer lies in Jain ethics rather than going to Anekanta. The ethics would say just take it as it is and be Madhyastha. Why do we need to jump from that Madhyastha to this conclusion that everyone can have a point of view? And that is Anekanta.
Okay.
I don't know if I have answered it, but this story of the blind man and the elephant is one of the perfect way to start Anekantava. The only point that I would like to say is we need to discuss more on that. And I know we may disagree right now with many things, but if not me, someone else is going to raise these questions very rigorously. That what is the history of Anekantavada that is promoting tolerance? There is no literature at all so far that I've come across which would say that Anekantavada is a means to promote ahimsa, or Anekantavada is a means to promote tolerance in the sense that people are talking today about it. And if you find one, I would be happy to really, I would be really grateful to you. So, yeah.
So, Jignesh Bhai, so what I'm understanding now is that Anekantwad is not the individual's point of view, it is the reality, or it's the things. So, for example, in the this elephant example, it's that reality that there is an elephant. That is Anekantwad. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Pretty much true. I just need 1 second. I need to bring my charger in.
Okay. Rekhaben, any more questions you have, or you want to continue with the Nayavad then?
Yeah, sure. We can continue with Nayavad.
Bhavishaben, anything?
Yeah.
I mean, if you all want to stop in between and clarify before we move on, if Praman is okay, because I know we had some issues with Praman, Rekhaben, you had it. So understanding that, but if
Right. I think the way Jignesh Bhai explained it,
Yeah.
rather than looking at it as knowledge, if we look at it as cognition, then it makes a lot more sense.
Right. I think he explained pretty well there. We
Yeah.
just have to probably, go over that again, digest it like you said. But if that's clear, then we can move on to Naivad and just have a little more explanation on that, especially the 7 Nais and everything. Is that
Yeah.
okay? Or if you all want to stop in between and ask, just feel free.
No,
Sure.
I'm okay. But I
Yeah.
surely need to hear this recording again.
Yes, I agree. We all do. That is true. But I like the way it's been explained. So Jinesh bhai, thank you so much for that. Let's, if
And
you are okay.
I'm really sorry for, just putting forth my arguments. But what I think, without raising those questions with respect to interpretation of Anekantavada, I today find it really hard to get it across to anyone who wants to understand it. Because everywhere there is that popular myth
Yes.
or that account that's there in the subconscious that you have to keep it, and then you have to make sense of what Anekantavada is saying.
No, I
So,
totally agree
I'm
with you.
sorry to create these issues right now, but
But that's a reality, so that's fine. We keep it. What I would prefer is, I think, like you said, maybe some references or something that you can later on give it to us. That would be good too, so we can kind of some basic ones, not to go in that deep. What, of course, from what your understanding is way too high level. We just want something very simplified, so that would be good. So yes, I think we can proceed on with going further into Nai, and basically the classification of the Nai would be where you can start off from.
so so you have two Nayas as very much primary, which is Dravyartika and Paryayartika. And then they are further expanded into seven. And these seven are basically part of two. And they are further types of these two. Or one can even have one other kind of distinction where you have Nishchaya Vyavharana. That's altogether a different topic. And that category of Nishchaya Vyavharana is a different category, and it need not correspond one-to-one with Dravyartik Paryayartik. Because with Vyavharanaya, again over here there are many problems, but I won't go into that right now. What Vyavharanaya would say would at times be something from a conventional point of view, and Nishchayanaya would say, no, this is not the correct thing. So Nishchayanaya basically refutes the Vyavhara position. But that is not the case with Dravyartik Paryayartik. The substance point of view does not refute the Paryaya or the modification point of view. They both can go hand in hand. So there is no hierarchy as such. They are both equal aspects of reality. But with Nishchaya Vyavhar, you have a very different category of Nayas. So this Dravyatik Paryayatik is actually about substance and modes. So substance would be the thing like Jiva, Pudgala, Dharma, Kashka. And Paryayas would be their own respective states. We usually talk about Jiva and Pudgala because the rest of the substances are more or less the transformations in them are not much relevant to us. Of course, space and time is has its own importance. But sticking to Jeev and Pudgala, you have this Naigamanaya, the first one, where it talks about the word itself says na ek gama, like it doesn't talk about one thing. It's about attributing past and the future to the present. Or let me read it from here as well.
Page 136.
Tattvartha Sutra. Yeah. Tattvartha Sutra gives an illustration of a person who carries water, rice, and fuel, and who, when asked what he was doing, says he is cooking. This activity of cooking is something that's going to happen in the future. It's not happening right now. And yet the statement that he made is, I am cooking. Even though he is still just going to the jungle to cut some wood, and the process has just started. Maybe let's There are many other examples to this. So, for instance, you talk about Ravana as a Tirthankara. What is it? It's about projecting the future into the present. It's about uh, uh, taking the future moods which that particular jiva might go through, which are not present right now, but still there is a perspective whereby we can attribute it to the present. The son of a king, Rajaputra, also gets treated as a king. The student who just got enrolled into an MBBS program, by the time that student is in third year, fourth year, may well be called as a doctor. All of this is quite possible because we are projecting the future into the present rather than present into the future. I mean, projection is not the correct term over there, but yeah, somehow you are bringing the future modes into the present, and it can also go with the past as well. So suppose someone is coming from hell and is behaving like one. So sometimes people end up calling those uh, people as if they are reacting in a hellish way. બહુ વધારે ક્રોધ કરે, બહુ વધારે કશાઈ કરે તો you can attribute all of that past to present, future to present. Even the Tirthankaras, the idol that we place in our temples, uh, unless we are talking about Sthanakavasi, but the iconic sects of Jainism within Shatambara and Dilambara, others, that state is of an Arahanta. But technically, Mahavira is right now a Siddha. So how do you have a Pratima of someone who is right now in the state of Siddha? How can you have that Pratima of an Arhanta state? And then you also have that ceremony of Pratishtha where you have 5 Kalyanak, Garbha, Janma, Diksha or Tap, whichever we call it. And then you have Gyan and then Moksha Kalyana. So Pratishtha has been done, means the Moksha Kalyanaka has also been celebrated. All that Vidhi, etc. is already done. And yet the idol is of the state of the Arhanta. Why? Because we cannot have a Pratima of a Siddha Parmeshri. We can have if we just draw the borders, but that doesn't help one to, connect with the Arhantas. So you have that Pratima, which is something of the past. It's not representing the present state of that particular jeev, but you still have the Pratima of the past as if it's valid, as if it's true. So you have Naigamanaya, and there are many other examples where you can talk about it. Then you have Sangrahanaya. So Sangrahanaya is about a collective point of view. This is again, I'll just explain what is mentioned over here first, and then, because, okay, the examples are general right now, but you can have a number of examples. So for instance, let's say Gunasthana. What is Gunasthana? You have 14 Gunasthanas. And technically, Gunasthanas are infinite, but the number 14 is for the sake of understanding, because we cannot talk about infinite Gunasthanas. So you have group of jivas belonging to different categories, different states, and you put them in one class and call it as first Gunasthana, fourth Gunasthana. So you are collecting things into one category. It's a kind of a sangraha. You classify all those jivas who are having mithyatva. Even though there are variations within mithyatva, still they will be called as mithyatva. So someone may be ending his or her mithyatva, let's say in 5 days. Someone would be ending it in next birth. Someone would never end it like Abhavyas. But right now, all of them are in that first Gunasthana. Sangrahanaya would not go into those details. It would just collectively bring things together and talk about them. So when you classify the jiva into sansari, mukta, the liberated ones and the non-liberated ones, all of these categories are sangrahana. It starts from sat, reality, that is sangraha, and that is the topmost where one can start with. And then you can have vyavharanaya. This vyavharanaya, the third one, is different from the vyavharanaya of nishchay vyavhara. This vyavhara is in contrast to the sangraha. So sangrahanaya is collective point of view. Vyavharanaya would be like something like individual point of view, specific. It won't talk about classes as such. It will always be the members of the class. It would never be about a class in general. So you say jiva, that would be sangraha. But if you say sansari and mukta, that would be vyavhara. If you say sansari jiv, that would be sangraha. Trasa and sthavara, that would be vyavharana. Then you have trasa jiv, that would be sangraha. And then you go on and on and on and on. Ultimately, there would be a point where you cannot further classify it into types or subtypes. So that would be the point of Vyavaharanaya, the bottom point. And on the top, you have the Shuddha Sangraha. At the bottom, you have that last Vyavahara, after which you do not have any further divisions. So Sangraha, Vyavahara keep on going hand in hand, and it depends which perspective is to be brought in where. So let's say, for instance, Asrava Tattva. It can be viewed from the Sangrahanaya, it can be viewed from the Vyavaharanaya as well. So from the Sangrahanaya, one can say Asrava leads to bondage and therefore it's to be discarded. But from the Vyavaharanaya, you have types of Asrava. So you have Pap Asrav, you have Punya Asrav, and you can distinguish over there by saying that Punya Asrava is somewhere better than Papa, but still it's Asrav, but it's not the same as Papa. So Sangrahanaya would just collectively say one thing. It's a generalized account. That generalization has to be treated as a generalization, whereas Vyavaharanaya would be addressing the specifics. It won't give a general description of reality. It would always be specifically related to. So for instance, the example given over here is of medicine. So Sangraha is a matter of Sangraha. If it's just one term representing a class, it has to be Sangraha. If you are coming across types where you have too many things altogether said at once, then it has to be Vyavaharana. A very easy sign to identify them. If it's just one word, and if you can think of types of them, but they are not mentioned, it is Sangraha. So 7 tattvas are actually the place where these nayas are to be employed, whether dravyartika, paryayartika, or even naigama, sangraha, vyavahara, and so on and so on. Even in the case of that idol of Mahavir Bhagwan, we are basically applying naigama naya to the paryaya of moksha, wherein we know that this jiva has attained liberation, but still we would want to have this state in front of us rather than that complete liberated state which is without body and all other things. So, making these topics relevant would be when we apply them to 7 tattvas, and 7 tattvas, 9 tattvas is one of the beautiful concepts that one can work around, develop it further. There are many nuances over there, and no doubt it's said to be constituting Samyak Darshan if you go by Tattvartha 1.2. Okay, so then you have 4 Paryayartik Nayas. Any questions so far? Am I going too slow? If you want, I can rush as usual. I mean,
No,
No,
you're
this is
good.
okay.
Yeah, we like the example, so that's good. But yeah, go ahead, Rikaban.
No, it's the right pace.
okay. So that was 3, and then you have the remaining 4. So Riju Sutra, Shabda, Samavirodha, and Evambhut. The last 3 are sometimes, I mean, they appear a bit complicated or confusing, but they are really fun to play with, and there are many subtleties over there. But let's go from Riju Sutra. So Riju Sutra is, Riju means, let's call it, how do I translate it? Is there a translation? Okay, that's okay. Sutra means thread. Yeah, please go ahead if you have something to add.
It's mentioned on our page 138, second paragraph, if you see. Ruju means simple and Sutra means knowledge.
Okay, fine. But, okay, fine.
Is there anything incorrect about that, or?
Now, I think sutra over here means thread, like dhaga, doro, and riju is something pointing towards pariyaya, but I am still not able to give you a literal translation of it. It is simple. Riju literally means simple. I'll get back on this.
Yeah, if you want to say in Gujarati, that's fine too. Either way is fine.
Matlab Ruju is like Sukshma. Ruju is like, so there are distinctions over there, but it's something like Sukshma, very much subtle, very much. And that's
We to say subtle, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Ken.
Actually, isn't sukshma like minute? Not subtle, it's more minute.
Subtle.
Or maybe
Yeah.
basic. I don't know if it's basic is what you're trying to say.
I think આપણે પેલું કરીએ ને સૂક્ષ્મ અને હિંસામાં આપણે કહીએ સૂક્ષ્મ અને
Badar.
સ્થૂળ.
Yeah.
So those are the two different. Sukshma is minute and sthul is gross.
Yeah, true. So this Riju Sutra has those two types, Sthula and Sukshma, where Sukshma would say that it would just grasp one particular moment, and Sthula would be grasping a particular group of moments, but it's about Pariya, that is for sure. The question is, since we cannot grasp one Pariyaya independent of in the past and the future, just one Pariyaya, which is very much subtle. So we always end up talking about the Sthul Pariyayas. Let's say, so if I ask you, which year is this that is going on? And we all will say 2021. But if I ask this on 1st January, and you would still say 2021. If I ask this today, it's still 21. If I ask this on 31st December, it is still 2021. But this Sukshma Riju Sutra would say, no, it's not the same thing. On the first day of the year, it was 2021.1. And on the last day, it was 2021.100. I mean, it's just completing. Even throughout the day, if I say today, 13th, oh no, it's 14th for both of us. So if I say it's 14th, it's there throughout the day. But if you look at those individual moments, it's not the same. You have 14.1, 14.2, 14.3, and so on and so on. So Riju Sutra is basically about those particular modes, about those pariyayas. And as mentioned, the approach of the Buddhist is of this type. And to ignore the specific qualities of the past and future and to emphasize only continuing characteristics of reality is a fallacy involved here. In this point of view, one considers ideas like reality, etc., as the direct grasp of here and now. So it's just about those moments. It's a series, and there's nothing beyond that. That would be the Buddhist position. So if one takes this Naya to the extreme, as an ekanta version of this Naya, Riju Sutra Naya, then it would lead to the Buddhist position. But if it is just Riju Sutra Naya without going to that extreme, it's about Parya. Now, how do we bring this in the classroom with, while you're teaching? Or again, I would say this, since this is specifically about paryayas, one has to see where this Naya needs to be employed and where it need not be. So it all comes down to who is the subject whom we are addressing, the context where it is required. Sometimes paryayas need not be emphasized that much. Sometimes they have to be emphasized. So, each and every paryaya has a result in its future. All of this motivational talk about you are the one who will define your future. Each and every small habit will lead to something bigger. So that's all something like this, because you are working on those paryayas, and those will lead to a result, a particular result, which is otherwise not possible. It's only by those small steps in each and every paryaya that you take that eventually you end up over there. And if I say still, so suppose you have a student who hasn't studied at all, but at the same time thinks that I can still score full marks in the exam that I'm supposed to appear tomorrow. Why? Because the exam has not happened right now. But this would say that Riju Sutra and I would say that the exam has not happened so far and I have still the chance to score full marks. But the Sthula Riju Sutra, the grosser one, it would say no, the exam started the day you took admission into this course. Throughout the year, you have to work on this subject, and only then you are eligible to score full marks. Otherwise, even though the exam hasn't taken place, doesn't mean that you would still end up scoring full marks, because it's not just those 3 hours that are relevant. It's about your preparation throughout the semester, which will be seen via this exam, via the result that this exam will produce. It's not just those moments. So you have those Sukshma and Sthula, and both of them are possible in this point of view. And then you have Shabdanaya, Samabhirodhanaya, Evam Bhutanaya. All of them are about words and their meanings. How do you interpret words? How do you derive meanings of the words? So Shabdanaya is a literal point of view. Samabhirodha can be etymological. Evam Bhuta is determinant. So Shabdanaya is that synonymous words convey the same meaning because they are synonyms. So it's just about, so I can use n number of words to refer to one and the same thing. Say for instance, Himsa, Asatya, Steya, Abrahma, and Parigraha. Shabdanaya can say that all of these refer to Avrata. Avrata can point to all of them, or they are all synonyms. Each of them is Avrata. Or this kind of interpretation is also there in Jain text. Again, both Digambara and Shvetambara. And that is, all of these vratas can be subsumed under ahimsa or himsa, if we are talking about the evils. So asatya is also himsa, steya is also himsa, abrahma is also himsa, and parigraha is also himsa. How? Because it's actually taking the soul away from its pure state. It's engaging the soul into all these impurities. Anything that is raga, dvesha, etc. is himsa. Anything beyond raga, dvesh, that is vitraga, is ahimsa. So something like so Shabdanaya can be used in many different ways to look at synonyms of the words. One has to work on this, because right now, so this is one example that I could think of, but one can develop some more examples, where different synonyms are pointing to one and the same phenomenon, and yet they have their own individual meanings as well. So Shabdanaya would say that let's not get into those individual meanings. We want to talk about the phenomena that all of these are denoting or referring to, rather than what they themselves individually mean. So, uh, yeah. Okay. So, and then you have this distinction between tense and case ending and gender and number and so on and so forth. But for all of this, some background in Sanskrit would help, because when I say, because in Sanskrit these examples are much more easier, because in Sanskrit the statement goes Parvatam Adhirohati, and in Hindi or in Gujarati if you translate Parvat par jao chu, Parvat ne chadu chu. But the vibhakti, the case ending that is used over there, is not conveying this sense. It is conveying Parvat ko, Parvat ne. That is what is being conveyed by that statement. I am lack at I am unable to expand this further right now, because I need to rethink the examples in English where they can work, where uh, it would make some sense, because otherwise it's very mechanical or just a dry explanation that one can just give. But these things like differences in tenses, now English has its own different sets of rules, and what might be feminine in English might not be in Sanskrit, and Sanskrit has 3 genders. And then we have vachana. So in English you have singular and plural. In Sanskrit there are 3: singular, dual, dvivachana, and then bahuvachana, plural. So Shabdanaya is about respecting those differences, but at the same time, they can convey synonyms. They can convey the same meaning as well, provided their tense, etc., is the same. So for instance, if I say sat and if I say satta, the word satta is a feminine case ending. The word sat is a masculine case ending. When I say bhava, it's again referring to the same thing, existence, satta. But Shabdanaya would say, no, these two are different things. But if I say bhava and then I say sat, they can refer to one and the same. But I mean, it's really difficult. I understand how this can be explained to the kids. So Samabhirodhanai, Evam Bhutnai, again, we will face the same difficulties, because for Samabhirodhanai, it would say that one word can have many different meanings, and those meanings can be conveyed by one and the same term. Sometimes those meanings are fixed conventionally. Sometimes those meanings are derived from its different ways of etymology. So, for instance, you have this root called as gum. Gum means to move, to go, but it can also mean to know. Jana, gaman karna, and at the same time, it can also be used in the sense of to know, janana. But again, it requires because these are related to the language, and I'm not saying that we cannot have examples in English. We will have to work afresh on this. and I am unable to do so right now. Evam Bhuta is again about those. So I can call myself a student. This is much more simpler than the others. Uh, I am a student only when I'm studying. I am a son only when I am performing those particular activities that defines a son, and so on and so forth. So Evam Bhut would be very much determinant of the particular activity that is going on. A jiva would be called as a jiva, no, not a jiva, but a jiva would be called as dharmatma or dharmi, or one who is practicing dharma only when that particular jiva is practicing. A muni is a muni only when a muni is doing the task of what defines a muni. Or a shramana is a shramana only when the shramana is doing what defines shramana, and so on and so forth.
Jignesh bhai, one question on Shabda and Sambirud Nai. What is the practical application of that? Like with Evam Bhut, it actually it makes sense where if you want to give somebody the benefit of doubt, or in that context, let's say if somebody was in the wrong but all along they've been right, you give them the benefit of doubt. You'd use that from the application standpoint. What would you use Shabda and Sambirud Nai for?
See, it's all tied up with the language. And for that, when you're talking in Sanskrit or in Prakrit or, all of this, you require them because words do have a number of meanings which may not uh, uh, imply the same thing. So there are n number of such words, and in Sanskrit, they have this verse which says that even if you don't study too much, at least study some sort of Sanskrit Vyakarana, because otherwise, so you have those sha, sha, and sa. You have those three of them, right?
Mhm.
Now, Sakrit and Swajana and Shwajana. So let me write it down. Yes, I'm writing in the chat. Jana, and you have Shwa, which is I've just split that letter because it was coming combined. So maybe if you are not able to read it. So you have Swajana and you have Shwajana. Now they both appear one and the same in terms of pronunciation. But the first one means our people, like those who are my relatives, whereas the latter one means dog. Shwa means dog. These are some subtleties which Sanskrit language has, and with respect to pronunciation, with respect to deriving meanings, even those terms like, let's say, bhava, abhava, or so when I say dravya is nitya, and when I say it is not nitya, that not nitya can mean many different things. One is that it's changing. Another one is that its permanence is not with respect to something else. It's with respect to itself. So let me give another example for this. This again relates to those seven bhangas as well. So when I say I am a son, these are my parents and I'm a son. So at the same time, I can also say I am not. When I say sugar is sweet, I can also say sugar is not sweet. But that not sweet would imply that it is white it is sticky, it is square in shape, it has weight. That is all that we can mean by when we say not sweet. Not sweet doesn't necessarily mean that it is bitter. Not sweet can mean some other properties as well. So it's all about playing with words. So amadhura, that it's not madhur, it's not sweet, can mean different things. So you have Samabhirudhanai, those 5 Parmeshtis, Upadhyaya, Sadhu, Acharya, those terms are basically an application of Samabhirudhanai. They are not doing Acharyatva 24/7. They are not teaching 24/7 and they are not doing sadhana 24/7. But we do classify them. Monitor is not a Okay, now I can give a number of examples because continuing that example of 5 Parmeshtis, you can go on now. Like, we still call a CEO, irrespective of that person is on a holiday or not, or is working or not. So you rude, you have those rudeness, like this has been fixed to have this meaning for this particular reason, for this particular context, even though literally it is not. So there are many usages of this. Okay, now I can add some more examples. I don't know how much time we have. I've taken 1.5.
No, you can continue. I think if it's not too late for you.
Yeah, it's up to you. I think
Yeah.
we should be okay for
Okay. So for instance, let's say money, wealth. Wealth in itself is just matter. It's just Pudgala, if we look at this theme of ontology. But Samabhirodhnaya would say, no, it is a means of parigraha, it is a means of kashaya, it would lead to problems, it's something to be discarded. That is the point of Samabhirodhanaya. Evam Bhutnaya would say, no, only when it leads to conflicts, only then you can accuse wealth as the reason for, this conflict. But otherwise, wealth is wealth. It's not good, it's not bad. But this is not how things work. If you want to convey some ideas where you have to make some generalizations and so you will say that wealth is parigraha, even though it might not be. Arhantas have samavasharana. Is it a parigraha? No, it is not, because they do not possess it. They do not have that attachment with it. But there is a samavasharana that goes along with the arahanta. But if I continue that same argument in my case, and if I say that અરહંત ભગવાનને આટલો બધું હોય છે, સમૂહ શરણમાં અતિશય હોય અને આટલું બધું વૈભવ હોય, and if I keep something, why is my possessing something called as parigraha, and why not in the case of arhant? Well, samabhirodhnaya, because for me these parigrahas most of the time will lead to rag dvesh, and I do have them, which is why I keep them. But for the arhantas, they will never do so. That is why they are just objects. They are not parigraha. So I think one can then go on and on with this.
Yeah, very,
Let
very
me just read.
interesting. Yeah, very interesting example of wealth here.
Yeah, I mean, there are many cases for that. Again, if I take that example of a university, if you want to study somewhere, you usually ask like which is the best place to do this particular course and to do this particular, have this particular degree. But it is rude. It's not evam bhut. We always go by samabhirud, like this is known to be the best. Ultimately, it depends on what you do after going over there. It's not about just taking admission and then you have the degree and you have the skills that needs to be developed. No, you have to work on it. So evam bhut would be the determining factor, but samabhirud is what helps us in our daily discourses. We cannot talk in terms of evam bhut. No. Because everywhere, whenever you say that this is the right place to study, the immediate argument would be, has everyone excelled after studying over there? No. Then why are you suggesting it to me? Well, it is Samavi rule. It's famous, it's known for it.
So you keep saying about rude. What's the actual meaning of rude?
Yeah, rude is like you fix a meaning to a thing which need not necessarily be the case.
Okay.
Like a president, right? It's a position.
Yeah, one can say that. Just like Acharya Upadhyaya. Like Upadhyaya literally means the one who teaches. But they are not doing that every moment of the day, every day, not even moments, but not even. It's not necessary that they teach every single day, yet they are Upadhyaya. So that is Samavi rule.
Okay. So I see, I understand now, because you said the university is best, but it's not best for all. But yeah, it is considered best. So that is the rude part. Okay.
Yeah,
got it.
yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Very nice. Good examples. Rekhaben, any more questions? Or I think the only other last part, if we want to know more about the Saptabhanga.
I'm sure depends on Jinesh Bhai if he wants to continue.
Well, I can go on for some more time.
Just an overview of the Saptabhanga would be beneficial, I think, just understanding, I mean.
Yeah. So the word Syat in that Syadvada is actually, it has a very different derivation. Uh, uh, it, okay, let me just reconfirm it.
139.
How is it translated?
I think on 140,
How
the
is the
second
word
paragraph.
Syat? Okay, maybe, perhaps, somehow, relatively, in a certain sense. I would prefer the last one, in a certain sense, as compared to the other ones. Because, in ordinary discourse, it works. It works, all of these, maybe, perhaps, somehow it works. But when subconsciously it implants certain other ideas, which may not be explicit over there, but later on they get manifested in some different ways. So when you say maybe, it also connotes that you are having some doubts. Maybe you are not sure. That is where we use maybe. I don't know. Maybe. I'm not certain. Perhaps is also one such word where you are not certain about thing, but you use it. So ordinarily, one can translate it in those languages, in those terms, but in a certain sense, that certainty is very much required, because otherwise it becomes ambiguous, it becomes relativism, which actually it is not, because relativism would be like, okay, I have a different concept of what ought to be done, you have a different concept of what ought to be done, and both are fine. Some cultures would say that genital mutilation is right. Some others would say, oh, it's a very gross form of violence. A cultural relativist would say, no, it depends on cultures. Uh, both are correct. But that is not Syadvada. Syadvada is about predicating certain things from a certain perspective, because we cannot talk about everything together. And that is why we need these 7 perspectives. Here, the last 4 of them, or last 3 of them, are more about mathematical combinations that lead to them. The primary bhangas are 1, 2, and 4, asti, nasti, and avaktavya. And the third one is a combination of 1 and 2. So what is it all about? So the word syat actually means, in a certain sense, from a certain perspective. And when you say syat asti, the word asti means it is. Nasti means it is not. But logically, if we try to represent this, which So it's not something like P, not P, P and not P, and uh, neither of them. No, this is not the correct way to represent this. It's something like this. P, not Q, P and not Q, and then you have simultaneous predication, so you cannot say anything which is neither of them. I hope you could see that difference. Why is it important? Because when we say Syat Asti, and then you talk about Syat Nasti, so people start something like this. Uh, uh, I am Jiva and I am not a Jiva. But this is not, this would be a very preliminary stage to just introduce, maybe, I don't know. But Syat Asti is I am Jiva, Syat Nasti is I am not Jiva. What changes is the lens or the perspective that you are looking at Jiva. If I look at my own Dravya Guna Paryaya, my own state of existence, I can say I am Jiva. If I'm looking at someone else's state of existence, I cannot say I am Jiva. To put this in a more easier way, person P is my father, but person P is not the father of someone else. He is my father. She is my mother. At the same time, she is not the mother of someone else. So, it's on one and the same thing where you have to apply both of them, Asti as well as Nasti. It's not that sugar is sweet and it is not bitter, and Syat Asti and Syat Nasti. No. Sugar is sweet, sugar is not sweet. It's just the perspectives that are changing. So if you look upon the shape of the sugar, and you can easily say, no, sugar is not sweet. But does it make sense? Yes, because you're referring to the shape and therefore it is not sweet. That's it. It doesn't need to imply that it is bitter. It can be anything but not sweet. So Asti, Nasti, and then you have Avaktavya, the fourth one. The third one is predicating two of them successively. And the 5, 6, 7 is more about combining 1 with 4, 2 with 4, and 3 with 4. So I won't go much into that, but these bhangas, 1, 2, and 4, they themselves are very much philosophical. One can bring them into the discourses, practical discourses, in many ways. It's again, it comes down to context, from which context you are asserting something. If that context is correct, then that statement is also correct. If that context is not correct, then the statement may also be false. Who decides that context? Well, the reality is so structured that those schemes have to fit to that reality. And therefore you have this Dravya Paryaya thing. So when you say Syat Nitya, means the thing is permanent from a certain perspective, from a certain sense. It is Nitya, but from a certain perspective, and that is of its substance. You can say it is Anitya, that is, it is not permanent. Now, not permanent can mean two things. One, it is changing. Two, its permanence is with respect to its own being and not with respect to others. So you can say it is not permanent with respect to the other things. It's permanent only with respect to itself. Now again, I would say applying these to 7 or 9 tattvas would be really a fruitful exercise. Let's talk about, say for instance, moksha. Who is attaining moksha? Well, the jiva is attaining moksha. So to talk about moksha in terms of karma would be the liberation of the jiva but it's still not addressing what's happening in jiva. It's addressing what is happening in karma. So if you want to talk about moksha from the perspective of jiva, one has to talk about that purity that is being achieved, that state of passionlessness, that state of omniscience, that state of vitragata, sarvagata, etc., that defines moksha. If I talk about it in terms of karmas or something else, it actually doesn't define the moksha of jiva. It's actually the moksha of karma, for instance. Karma छूटी गया ना, जीव ना सोता है. The jeev got liberated, but from what? If it is from karma, then it means that the jiva was already in that liberated state. It's just karma સાથે હતા હવે અલગ થઈ ગયા. But that's not a complete description of it. So to predicate moksha to jiva, one can apply these bhangas and see what actually constitutes it and what does not constitute it. Same goes with other tattvas, like when I say ekendriya jiva, बेइंद्रिय जीव, त्रण इंद्रिय, चार इंद्रिय, पंचेंद्रिय जीव. What am I predicating? I am predicating the senses to the jiva. So do the senses belong to the jiva? Well, no, they are parts of the body and yet they are being predicated. Why? Because it has a particular purpose or a context and so on and so forth. But the scheme of predication, what is to be predicated to what, is usually decided upon the intention of the speaker, or maybe the context, or it should result into something called as heya upadeya, knowledge of heya upadeya. It should result into getting rid of ignorance and so on and so forth. So, yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, very nice example. And I think it made a lot of things clear for myself, at least. Dinesh bhai. But,
Yes, that was very, very nice and well explained, simplified, good examples. I think this itself should be very helpful.
Yeah. I actually was not prepared for this in the sense that I was expecting some more questions. So I thought maybe we can have some discussions. So maybe in some areas I might have left out some topics. So for instance, these later Nayas in the sevenfold scheme, or the seven bhangas as well. But I am fine if we need to meet again.
No, I mean, I think as far as you probably with all your vast knowledge might think that you might have left out, but for us, this was a lot too. We will probably have to go ahead and hear it over and over. And then if any questions, we can communicate either through email or meet again. If other coaches want to, we can do that. But I think this was excellent. This really helped us a lot. But again, coaches, if any questions, Bhavisha Ben, Rekha Ben, Harshva, anybody has questions, then we can ask right now.
No, right now I don't have any questions, but I'm sure once I hear the recordings again, I will have few questions. But the examples were really, really helpful to understand.
Mhm.
Yeah, same here. Actually, one request that I did have was the examples that you gave for the bhang. If we can use one consistent example to explain each of those, I think that would be super helpful for all the students and for us as well.
Yeah.
Actually, the consistent example, not just for the bhangas, but also for the Naya. I think if there is any way there can be a consistent example for all 7 of the Nayas, that would be useful. I know it's going to be very difficult, but I'm just thinking aloud if that is possible. But I think overall, I loved your examples. I loved your explanations. Definitely made it easier for me to understand this. But like Shwetaben said, I agree that we need to look at this, review it, listen to it, and then I'm sure we're going to have more questions. Right now, it's first we need to understand it before we ask you intelligent questions.
No, that's all right. And again, I would say that just try to understand Anekantavada without that particular interpretation along the lines of Ahimsa. Because if eventually, we do face all these questions that if it's about everyone's point of view, why do you talk of ethics at all? Why do you prescribe certain things and why do you say these things are not to be done and these are ought to be done? It also ends up into some other debates like, you would never have disagreements, genuine disagreements. You would always be forced to say that, okay, fine, I have to agree because it's your point of view. But we do have disagreements, and disagreements are part of reality. We cannot have everyone agreeing with everyone just because everyone has a point of view. No, disagreements are to be treated as disagreements and they will remain no matter how hard we try. It was there in the times of Rishabh Dev because Marichi disagreed with him. And it's okay to disagree. Disagreement is not an evil as such. There's a seminar that is about to happen in a couple of months. I'm presenting this paper, Can an Anekantavad disagree? Because right now what is happening is, any lay person, any lay Jain that I talk with, and immediately the discourse ends up on Anekantavad and saying that, but that person is right from his or her own point of view. And I find it really hard to then make sense of the Jaina position, whether it's on Ahimsa or on reality or the Moksha Marga or the Tattva or the Samyak Darshana or so for instance, the universe is not created by anyone. This is a fundamental truth for Jainism. And you say, no, it's true for someone who has created the universe, and it's also true for someone who says that it's not created. And then Jains, like us, we also go on to say that Jainism is scientific. Science would always be against these kinds of relativistic claims. I mean, you need to have some fundamental truths without which the system doesn't stand. So please do not think about, that I am trying to break this system. I'm rather trying to build this on the text, and I can really give you n number of references on whatever I have said. It's not my interpretation. It's actually how Anekantavada is talked about in the text.
No, it's really good, Jinesh bhai. I think what you explained is right. The unfortunate thing is Anekantvad is not as well explained like Ahimsa and Aparigraha is. That's the unfortunate thing amongst the lay Jains, like you would say. So all Jains were just like you have explained. That's what the common belief is right now. But it's because it's very poorly understood. It's just touched here and there, like you said. So hopefully we can get this out, and maybe, as you work on it, we can maybe have that better.
And the only reason why I'm sharing this is because this is going to the next generation and then the next generation. So I had two thoughts in my mind, that what would, let's say, Raj bhai or all of you might think, because I'm creating problems for you right now rather than solving them. But at the same time,
this actually does explain a lot of things. Like, for instance, when our students come and say, the other person in my class is eating meat, is that right? And from their perspective, they think it's right. So we should also accept it. And then it becomes hard for us to explain it. But now if we bring it back to Ahimsa and say, if you look at it from the Ahimsa point of view, eating meat would not be right. And just because they're doing it, it doesn't mean that it becomes right.
And I was actually in this dilemma, whether I talk about this or I just stay silent and just not touch it, and I can just ignore that question altogether. But it's so dominant right now that without breaking it, we will never be able to reach the core of this doctrine.
Yes.
And
I fully
okay,
agree, and
sorry.
I think work on it. That's good. Keep working, and I'm glad you brought this up in this way, because it really bothered me also. Just the way Anekantwad is not explained clearly in any of our books, and it's just touched here and there. So, where in which agam does Anekantwad? Is it explained more in details? Anything? Do you know which one?
Yeah, so Bhagavati Sutra has some references to Syat and how Mahavira responded to questions like, is the world eternal or non-eternal, and so on and so forth. But actually it starts from, let's say, the works of Kunda Kunda, Umaswati, and then of course you have two great acharyas, Siddha
I see.
Sena and Samanta Bhadra. It's basically in the works of these two philosophers that Anekantavada is fully espoused, and one particular text of Samanta Bhadra is commented by three other philosophers, Akalanka, Vidyananda, and Yashovijay. All three of them has written a commentary on that, and it's actually a commentary on a commentary on a commentary. So it's not that Yashovijay ji is writing on Aptamimansa directly. He is writing on Akalanka's commentary. He is writing on Vidyananda's commentary, and they are all dealing with this Anekant. That entire book, Aptamimansa, is on this topic. And if you really want to get deeper into it, I would say try reading verses 100 to 110. Within those 10 verses, many things would become clear. There are English translations of Aptamimansa available on Jaini Library. There is one by Nagin Shah, there is one by Sarat Chandra Ghoshal. But those 10 verses would really clear up many things in Aptamimansa. And then among the secondary literature, if you ask me, I don't know if you have heard his name, John Court from Denison University, US. Then you have Piotr Belcerowicz from Poland. He is also a scholar in Jainism. You have uh, Johnson, who passed away last year. He also wrote something on these lines that Anekantavada really needs to be reworked upon.
Yeah.
And to me, see, I'll again keep on emphasizing this thing, whether I could have stayed silent over here and just let it happen right away. But you know what problem is that tomorrow non-Jains, or let's say someone else starts raising this question, whether academically or non-academically, the Jains will not have an answer to support this view because the texts do not talk about it. So someday it has to come off, and I don't know how and when. But
No, that's good. We keep up with that. That's fine. But I think so. This was really, really helpful. Understanding the and just the overview, Anekantwad, Praman, all the Nai that you explained. But like Rekhaben and Harshvai said, if you can think of, and you don't have to do it now, but later on you can send it to Rajbhai, email it also. If there is one example that you can explain for the Saptabhanga, that just even if it's Asti, Nasti, and Avaktavya, and just kind of one thing that explains related to that one example, you can explain in all three of them, and also one that explains the Nai. I don't know if that's possible, but if you can think of a particular incident to explain all seven, then it's a little easier. And if you can come up with a couple of them, that would be even better. But just staying on one for all seven. If you can think and send it to us, we would appreciate that. Would be nice. It may not come right now.
for Nayas, it's not possible. For Bhangas, it is very much possible. And for Bhangas, in order to make your process of explaining it to the kids easier, I would suggest to not go into all seven of them and just be more focused on 1, 2, and 4, because The rest are possibilities, they are mathematical, logical possibilities. They might not be that much dominantly used in the practical discourse. So it's a different domain over there. But yeah, I can send across something maybe. Oh,
Okay.
For,
No,
for
that's
the Nayas, is it possible to have the 3 and the 4 have one example each that can be used across?
so
I don't know
you
if
can
that's
have
possible.
one example for Sangraha and Vyavahara together. As I said, many of them like Jiva,
Yeah.
and then you have for Naigama, it's a different category. For Raju Sutra, it's a different category. So the examples,
Okay, so
I
like
don't think
Ruju Sutra, what I was thinking was Ruju Sutra, Shabda, Samabirodha, and Evam Bhut. Can that have one example?
the later three, the last three
The
can
last
have
three.
one.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
They can have one.
even if because I understand, most of these things, sometimes we have a challenge in English when we have to translate. So even if your example is going to be in Gujarati, just send it to us, and that would be a little easier if we have to, at least the coaches can understand and somehow explain it. But I can understand these are directed mostly to our either Sanskrit or Gujarati language, and English becomes different with the grammar being completely different than ours. So yeah, if you can think of even in the other language, but like Harsha said, even if it's grouped in a few, that would be fine.
Great session. I think બહુ late થાય છે આપણે. So
Yes,
we'll,
sorry, but
yeah, we'll end
thank
this
you
here.
so much. Yes,
Yeah,
thank you very
thank
much, Jinesh bhai.
Thank you.
Yeah, and my sincere apologies for. I think I could have had made it much more. Let's
No,
say,
no. So you don't have to apologize. Actually, you did very well. And our intention here is to make this correct, right? So even if certain places, certain things are not explained properly or incorrectly, we want to correct it. And to give you a background of idea why we connected with you is to get that correctness, right? So we, with the aim of teaching the things that are in our agam, and that is what we want to teach. So we don't have any bounds here like you have in India, right? We actually can teach what is what is correct, or what is it meant to be. So which is great because we have good teachers, good coaches, and we have Shweta Ben.
yeah.
I'm just no, but I like it when we want to go the right way, because I do see that there is a lot of misunderstanding on Anikantwad, people that we know. So thanks, and thank you again. Sorry for taking so much of your time too, and appreciate
No,
just
I was more interested in having this discussion because it helps me to think more. It helps me to write more. So I am thankful to all of you
Yeah.
to be.
and we could have had a Q&A session, but for that first we need to understand to ask questions. So now we'll try to rehear this, and then we can probably come up with some questions. But we appreciate the discussion and explanation that you did with the examples. So thank you, and thanks Rajbhai for arranging this.
Sure, no problem. Thank you, Jinesh bhai. I will keep in touch with you. I'll call you, and then we'll compile all the questions that we have for you. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jai Jinendra.
Jai Jinendra.
Jai Jai.
Jai Jinendra. Bye.